The sun in our animation. This is the classic Outrun style sun or retro style sun, which you may have seen in other pieces of artwork in this style. So we are going to create our own version, and it's also going to be animated and it's going to be looping. So let's see how that works. So if we look at our sun here, which by the way could also be a moon, just depending on how you interpret this scene, you can see that we have these lines animating upward. You know, that animation is also looped. So we need to set this up in Cinema. The starting point for this is going to be a disk shape, which inserts somewhere underneath the floor there. Let's change its orientation to Z+. Now, for me to do this in a clean way, I need to just be looking at that object by itself. And to do this, I use a plugin called Magic Solo. So if I select my disk, click that solo icon, it's going to isolate just this object, and I can continue to work on it. And then when I am finished, I would just click this once again, and everything else will come back. This is a free plugin, which I can include in the class files for you. But Cinema 4D actually has its own solo switch built in. I just prefer how this plugin works, so that's why I use that. But with Cinema 4D, if you click the solo switch, you can basically do the same thing, and then when you're finished, go back to here. But in my opinion, solo works better because it extends to materials and also the various objects which are listed here. So it's much cleaner and in my mind a better way to work. Anyway, to install this, you would have to go to Preferences, so Edit and Preferences. In this window, you want to go down to the bottom left corner here and click Open the Preferences folder. And then you will see where Cinema 4D installs plugins. This folder right here, that's it right there, this Magic Solo plugin. It's a very small but very useful plugin. Once you unzip the folder to here, or place the folder here, you want to close this, restart Cinema 4D, and then you also need to place this icon in your user interface. To do this, go to Window, Customization, and Customize Commands. And you want to search for it here. So if I just look for solo, you can see all commands in Cinema 4D related to that solo function, but our plugin is clearly this one right here. And I would just drag this somewhere in my interface, wherever it is easiest for you to click. You want to place it there. Now, I already did this before, so I don't need to do this twice. If I edit palettes, I can double click and make that disappear. To save this layout, I would then have to go to Window, Customization, and Save as Startup Layout, so that the next time I launch Cinema 4D, it will remember that I added this extra icon. And you need to do this each time you rearrange your user interface. Otherwise, you will lose all those changes. Anyway, with that disk isolated, I will continue and make some changes here. One of them is there aren't enough segments. It's a bit jagged around the corners. So let's up this from 16 to 100. And next up, I want to get a cube and set its Y height to 10 and the width to, let's say, 400, anything wider than our disk shape. Let's clone the cube. So if I hold the Alt key as I insert this cloner, it automatically makes the cube a child of the cloner. And this is already working. Here, I want to lower the position Y from 50 to just 20. And I also need more clones. So let's say something like 50. And what I want to do is cut into the disk shape using these cubes. So the way this works is there is a tool called the bool tool. If I get this, place both these objects into the bool tool, reverse the order that they are in, the disk shape needs to be above the cloner. And when I do that, now you can see I am using the cloned cubes to cut into the disk shape, and that's how we create those lines. And you can see as I am moving these, it gives an animated effect. And that's exactly how I constructed this. Now there's more to do here. So let's continue. To animate this and make sure that it loops, you have to use some very precise numbers. Now I've already done this before, so I know what numbers they need to be, and I'm going to show you now. Before we do that though, let's make sure that our timeline is going to be the final length, which in this case is 8 seconds. So if I just type in 8 and then extend this here to make sure we see the entire timeline. And if you are wondering how my timeline is in seconds, not frames, you want to go to Edit and Preferences, and then in Units, change the animation unit from SMPTE, or rather to SMPTE. So by default, this will be set to frames. You want to change this to SMPTE. That's how I work. I just prefer this method of displaying my time, because above that anyway, I can still see the actual frame numbers. Anyway, 8 seconds is the actual entire length of this animation, but because it's a loop, you know, if I play it back here, it just keeps going back to the beginning and it just looks like it keeps on going forever. Let's animate this and make sure that it loops correctly. If I click on the cloner, let's go to the end actually of our animation. The position of this, so this is in the coordinates of the cloner, it needs to be set to -200. And I just know this because I tested this already. And I will keyframe this value. So if I hold Control and click this gray circle, when it's red, it means that I have set my keyframe, and it also shows up in the timeline as this small rectangle here. Let's go back to the beginning of the animation, and I will set this position to -100. The reason that's our starting point is because if I disable the bool tool for a second and go to, let's say, the front view, you can see that's just where the disk shape begins. So I just wanted to make sure that it's contained entirely within the arrangement of our cubes and not outside. So -100, that's why that happens. And then our animation is going to do this. And I've noticed this is actually backwards. So what I want to do is select this keyframe. I can do that here in the timeline by just scrubbing over it until it's orange. Set the key value to -100. And then the beginning should be -200, because I need this to be going up instead of down. So now if I play it back, we can see the lines are going up. In the main viewport, the 3D view, let's re-enable our bool tool. If I go to Window and Timeline, I want to make sure here that the keyframe curve is linear, because by default it's going to ease in and ease out. If I extend this, you can see what's going on. So if I click the linear switch with the keyframes selected, it's going to make sure that this moves at a constant speed throughout. So if I go back to the beginning and play this, it moves at a constant speed, and it's also going to loop and move back to the beginning. Okay, so this is working perfectly. If we look back at our example, we can see that the lines here, or the gaps rather, they vary in width. The widest ones are at the bottom, and then as you go up, they get thinner and thinner until they actually disappear past a certain point. So let's go ahead and do that here, because right now they're just the same width throughout the entire shape. This should have disappeared by about 2/3 of the way up the disk shape. So to do this, I need to select my cloner, go to MoGraph Effector and Plane. By default, this just shifts everything by 50 centimeters. If I go to the parameter, or actually 100 centimeters, I can see that position is enabled and it's moving everything up by 100 centimeters. Let's turn off position we want to affect the height of each cut. So this is going to be adjusted in the scale. If I simply turn this on, it's the Y scale, so the height, so that's X, Y, and Z. X is the width, height, and depth. Let's set this to -1. And this is going to make all the lines have a height of completely 0. So that's also not going to work. What we want to do is have a fall off, so that at the bottom down here, it's, the lines have 100% of their original height. And then as you move up, they slowly get smaller and smaller. So with the plane effector selected, I want to go to the fall off tab, and let's create a linear field. Just a note here, this will be different in older versions of Cinema 4D, so I will have to create an extra lesson, just a bonus showing you how this exact same thing works in older versions of Cinema 4D. But for now, let's continue with our current version. This linear field, I will change its direction from X plus to Y, because we are affecting this in an up and down direction. And already when I do that, you can see how this is going to work, right? You can see the lines are thicker down here and slowly get smaller as you go towards the top. I need to move this down, and this top or this upper limit needs to be where I want the lines to completely disappear. So that's about 2/3 of the way up the disk, or about -50 centimeters in the position. If I go to display and just do growth shading, so we're not looking at any lines here, and play this through, you can see what the effect is. So the lines get smaller and smaller because of this fall off until they completely disappear. What I would do is take this entire setup, place it inside of a null object, and I will call this sun number 1. And then I will create another null and nest that in there for a second time. Let's call this sun 2. And you will see why I have just done that shortly. Let's hit the magic solo button to go back to everything else that's in the scene. But we can quickly make a shader for that sun actually. So if I go to my materials and click all materials, and these are appearing in layers, by the way, because I have put the DMC model or the DMC12 model in a layer by itself, just to keep things organized. So if I go and just show all the materials anyway, double click and open this new material. In the luminance channel, we want to create a gradient. This is going to be 2dV, so it's vertically oriented. And then when I have this kind of colors, one is like a pink, and then one is more of an orange yellow. Okay, let's solo the sun once again, and you can see the materials disappeared because I didn't apply it yet. So let's apply it, and this can be on the disk itself or on everything all at once. So these colors are actually flipped. Let's go into the gradient and invert. So the reason I nested this twice is because of the next step. It was kind of a hack I had to do because of the way I set up the scene. This is going to be really far out there in the distance, but I didn't want to have to navigate away from, this area of my scene all the way out there each time I wanted to make a change. So what I did instead was I would instance the sun at this level, the first null object I created. So if I instance that, I create a copy of that whole setup. And this is what I can then throw away into the distance. And then anytime I want to make changes, I just continue changing it inside of this layout. And then the instance that's out there in the distance will automatically update also. So let's see how this works. If I jump back into my camera and move the instance to 80,000 centimeters away, and also up to about 12,500 centimeters, it's now so far away that it's no longer visible. But if I selected that new instance, in the coordinates, I can set its X size to 175 and the same for the Y size. And this is going to extend it to be much larger. Now, the reason there was a second level null object is because I want to be able to hide the first one down here. Because if I just hide this one, it affects the instance and makes that disappear too. So that's why I had to nest it twice. Instance the first one and then just use the second one to hide the first one. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Hopefully I'm not making everything too confusing here, but that's just a hack